You should say we're back to answering your questions.
No, let's just make the video. Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sika Stand. Now, a question we get sometimes is, I have adequate mobility in my ankles, or I might have great mobility in my ankles. I have huge amounts of dorsiflexion. I have great foot stability, and my knees travel well in excess of my toes. Do I have to wear weightlifting shoes or squatting shoes, as some people might call them, which is wrong? Can I squat without the use of weightlifting shoes, a heel elevated apparatus like a heel wedge? Can I just go into the gym and squat barefoot? And the answer is yes, but with a couple of caveats. And to cut this a little bit short, cut to the end, you watching probably aren't one of those people.
So the first thing we have to look at here is why you'd wear shoes to squat. And there's probably three main reasons you'd wear shoes to squat. The first one is that most weightlifting shoes or squatting shoes will have an elevated heel in comparison to where the ball of your foot lies. What that allows us to do is it allows us essentially to push our knees further forward in the squat. It'll allow us to squat deeper and squat with a more vertical torso. So a very simple way of thinking about this is if you have limited ankle mobility, that means you can only bring your ankle to 90 degrees. When you sit down into the bottom of the squat, that's going to be the limiting factor. Your shin will be almost vertical in the bottom, and you won't be able to keep your hips forward over your base of support or over your heels. This will mean you really have to incline forward, and you'll end up having that kind of powerlifting style or low bar style squat, which will be very, very posterior dominant, and you won't get any leg development from it really. This is the reason you'll see powerlifters squatting massive weights with that really inclined forward posture, but having very small spindly legs. Now, if I take that 90 degree ankle mobility that I have and I increase the height underneath my heel, I will get some sort of quasi ankle mobility, or I'll get the appearance of increased ankle mobility. In fact, what I'm doing is I'm just moving where my ankle sits in space. This in turn allows me to push my knees further forward. It allows my hips to follow my knees further forward and sit deeper into the squat, and will allow my torso to be more upright. All of these things will allow for greater levels of quad development and will allow for a more weightlifting style high bar back squat. The second reason then we'd want squatting shoes or weightlifting shoes is that wearing shoes gives us inherently more stability around the foot. So it's not even just up around the ankle, it's the foot itself. So our foot is made up of obviously skin, tendons, ligaments, bones, cartilaginous tissue. And when we put a shoe around it and tighten down the laces, all of that gets compressed slightly and becomes a slightly more stable unit. Now, we do lose a small amount of cross-sectional area, or we lose a bit of area underneath the sole as well, which can limit our ability to balance ourselves or stabilize ourselves. But most of the time, when we put a shoe on the foot, we get increased stability of the actual foot itself. So of those bones that are sitting inside basically a skin sock, and we get increased stability of the ankle. Now, the final reason you should wear shoes while you're squatting, or most of us would recommend you wear shoes while you're squatting, is most environments where you're squatting are not too hygienic. It's not really hygienic for you to be walking around with your shoes off, and it's not really hygienic for other people either. So most of the time it is better to have your foot covered by something that will give you both protection from standing on a piece of chrome that's peeled off a barbell, or maybe it's slight amount of protection from a plate falling down on top of you. That's before we talk about any of the bacterial or viral infections you could get, like athlete's foot or something similar.
Fluorides. So there is a couple of scenarios where it's okay to squat barefoot, but might not necessarily be the best scenario. And then there are some scenarios where it might actually be a better option for you to not squat with a heel elevated shoe. So in the scenarios where it's okay to squat without weightlifting shoes, but it's probably better if you do, is if you're a strength athlete. You might be someone who is recreational strength training. You might be strength training for a sport, or maybe somewhere in between, or some kind of mix of those. In that scenario, if you have excess or a large amount of dorsiflexion or ankle range of motion or forward knee travel when you squat or an upright torso compared to the average person. If your knee goes in front of your toe very, very easily without the use of weightlifting shoes or a heel elevated shoe, then you probably have the option to squat without weightlifting shoes, with the caveat that you have to understand that because of the aforementioned reasons that Dara just talked about, you're probably going to limit your squat by a little bit. Now, will it limit it a little bit or a lot over the long run? It's kind of impossible to say, but I would suggest, and we would speculate, that you're probably capping your squat by a couple of kilos over the lifetime of your training. Now, that might not be that important to you. It might not make a huge difference to you. You might be a primarily hypertrophy athlete or a hypertrophy specific kind of athlete, and you just want to grow bigger legs, or you really like the idea of just squatting barefoot, and you don't particularly care that you might squat 200 kilos as opposed to 210 kilos. It might make a little bit of a difference. So if you're in that scenario where you have enough foot stability, you've well developed arches, you don't have pronated ankles, you can get a large amount of knee travel over your toes, then in that scenario, we'd say go right ahead. We're all about training that keeps you happy, that you're enjoying, as long as you know some of the caveats and some of the pros and cons of what you're doing. As long as you're well educated, that's what we're here for, is to educate you, and then you make those best decisions on what you want to do. So if you're in that scenario, you're a recreational athlete, maybe you're a hypertrophy athlete or something like that, you've taken into account what Dara said about the benefits, and you're happy to lose some of those benefits and you just want to train that way, then we speculate that you probably have a good chance of having a good quality squat, or at least you're not in a terrible environment to not have a good quality squat. Do you want to add something?
Sorry, no. I thought you were coming to the crescendo.
You maybe lose my train of thought.
Sorry.
So for those athletes, it might be a viable option, with the understanding that there's probably just some slight negatives to your top 1RM at the end of the day, or at the end of your training block, or however long you do this for. Now, the other person who probably benefit, maybe not from a barefoot squat, but certainly from a flat shoe, maybe a deadlift slipper or some of these squat shoes that are coming out that are very, very flat, is someone who competes in potentially competitive powerlifting and you squat with a primarily low bar style squat. If you're squatting with a low bar style squat and you squat with maybe the kind of modern hybrid style of squat that we talk about a lot, or maybe you even squat with a style of squat that's similar to what we used to be taught during the equipped powerlifting era, West Side, Elite FDS style squat, where you kind of sit back and open your legs, you may be in a position where you don't want this forward shifting of your body weight, where you don't want forward travel of your hips and your knees, because this will throw you out of position. For this person, when you're trying to get just below parallel, you want to keep it essentially either a mix, depending on your style of squat and your build, a mix between anterior and posterior dominance, where you're kind of equally, maybe not dominance, but an equal distribution of load between these two, where you just want to sit down, you have a slightly inclined torso, and you're using your ass and your quads to an equal extent. Or if you're sitting right back, you don't want this position where you have the heels elevated, you're trying to sit back to parallel and open up your knees, but this elevated heel is pushing your center of gravity forward. You're getting this lower pelvic tucking, which is not ideal for maintaining an upright or consistent extension in your upper body. So for those scenarios, it's actually quite common for some athletes, depending on their build and their style of squat, to choose not to squat with weightlifting shoes, or potentially squat with weightlifting shoes that have a lower than average style of heel. Sometimes you'll see Adipower or Adidas's cheaper lifting shoes have slower heels, so they get some of the benefits of that heel elevated harder sole shoe, but they don't necessarily need that full inch or approximate inch elevation in the heel to drive their knees all the way forward, because it may be counterintuitive to the style of squat that they're using.
So to finish up, if you're in one of the groups we've mentioned here, it might be better if you do or don't squat with shoes. We can't really give you the straight answer for 100% of the cases. One thing I will say though is sometimes people get a bit caught up in the grass about why they want to squat barefoot. So certain people might look at the sport they're doing and say, I do judo or I do jiu-jitsu, I'm training and competing on the mats, and I never have a heel raise when I compete, or I'm a field sports athlete, I don't have a heel raise in my cleats, so why would I then have a heel raise if I'm trying to emulate positions I'm doing in my sport? When we look at mechanics and when we look at actual biomechanics in our S&C work, it's very important that we're not directly mirroring our sports performance or our actual sports skills we're doing. The use of S&C work is to develop our physiology to make us as strong and as resistant to injury as humanly possible. So it's very important you don't get caught up in the grass of, oh, it's not specific to my sport, so I don't do it, or it's not going to directly emulate the skill I'm trying to do in my sport. The thing with squatting is you want the best squat possible, and then you bring all that strength, all that power, all that speed and coordination into your sport.
To give you a personal example, I am someone who has a large amount of forward knee travel in their squat. I am well built for squatting. I have great ankle stability, arches, maintenance of the position during the squat. I've done a lot of the squats during this block barefoot, but even still in that scenario, I still even benefit from that slightly better percentage of better quality squats using the use of weightlifting shoes or squatting shoes. And that better squat session, that better on average session of squats adds up over time for a better quality training block.
So thanks very much for watching. Today's video is brought to you, as always, by the Sika Strength app. This is all the glory of Sika Strength programming written by myself and Owen, with some added extras in there. So as you're going through maybe the Road to Anywhere squat program, as you input your details, how you get on with each of the sessions, the program will slightly alter your volume, your load, what you're meant to do over the course of that training cycle to allow you to get the absolute most out of your training. Also, the real key point of this app is you're not left alone while training. So you have access to video feedback from myself and Owen via our members group. You also have an AI that's been trained on all 5 years of Sika Strength videos and content that's going to be able to shoot you back a very, very quick answer, and an answer that myself and Owen will have developed over the course of our years coaching. So maybe you're going through a squat session and you say, my heels are raising off the floor. Why is this happening? You can quickly go in, chat to the coach bot. It will give you an answer. A lot of the time it will give you an answer and pop a video onto you as well. And you have an instant solution to your problem right away.